What are dreams? What are they truly? Are they nothing more than bits and pieces of thoughts and ideas thrown together without design or purpose? Might they serve a greater purpose, such as whisper tales of coming days, or reveal forgotten, lost recollections from days long past? Maybe the soul is expelled from our bodies each night, thrust out into the void, and travels to lands far away. Consider this. What if our dreams are more than just nonsense? What if they were premonitions and told of adventures not yet had? Tell me, have you ever had a dream that revealed wonders so great it made your waking life seem distant and dull? Have you ever dreamed a dream that revealed glimpses of who you are and whispered secrets of what you are meant to become? Do you know of anything that could fill you with such sorrow, to awaken each morning and desire with all your might that your eyes would open to a brand new world, yet it never comes? With every sunrise, that is the burden I bear. However, such sadness does not consume me, for you see, in my heart, I know my dreams are much more than wishful thinking and a longing desire for something more to this life. They are so much more than you could possibly imagine, for you see, my dreams are preparing me for great things to come. I know that to be the truth. No, it does not offend me when you roll your eyes at me. You are not the first to dismiss my words or mock my resolve. Many simply laugh out of amusement, and others feign looks of pity towards me. They say, surely only one who is mad would entertain such foolishness. They can see only a land of make-believe, a fairy tale fabricated from the mind of a boy. They cannot accept that a child, orphaned as an infant, who never knew the embrace of a mother or the guidance from a father, could still possess a birthright of greatness. Nor would they consider such a waif could excel above all others with only the determination of his heart and the strength of his hands. Despite it all, I hold no malice toward anyone, for their conclusions are not without logic, albeit sadly short-sighted. Soon all will be revealed, for tomorrow is my celebrated day of birth, and when I am gone, they will know they were wrong. You see, tomorrow is the day my days have been telling me about for as long as I can remember. It is the day my dreams foretold. Before the sun sets on your 5th and 10th year of life, you shall return with hope and salvation on your back and a light in your hands. By your blade, you will rid the land of the worm. That is what I see each and every night when I close my eyes and surrender to sleep. So for one brief moment, let go of all of your misgivings and apprehensions. Leave behind your doubt and listen to my voice. Listen and let me tell you about my dreams. In my dreams, There is a realm so close to our own that only the width of a hair separates the two. They exist side by side, unaware of one another. Yet they are so far apart that traveling the distance would take 1,000 years. It is a medieval realm where science and magic live alongside each other as beloved friends. Machines and technology, sorcery and magic, here they are one. In this world, little distinction can be seen in matters of wizarding and science. Sorcerers and teachers, or magicians and healers, they are the same here. This realm is ruled by 6 great nations, each with a king and queen of virtuous heart and noble blood. Castles and villages, farms and towns pepper the land. All live simplistic lives, with a hint of technologies, both natural and mystical. In my dreams, I see a beautiful, white, domed temple made of ivory stone. The temple is home to 6 revered weapons made from sacred steel, a gift from a goddess and bestowed upon a chosen warrior from each nation. She offered these weapons in preparation for the day foretold, the day of the worm. Honored are those blades, but in the center of the temple is the 7th altar, the spot most exalted. Upon this shrine rests the armor and weapons of the 7th son of the 7th sun, a boy born under an eclipse of the 3 moons and conceived from the joining of a mortal and a god. His bloodline is destined to ignite the realms within shadow and despair, and shine hope upon the oppressed and dying people. In my dreams, the weapons I wield are made from mystical steel of silver and blue. My armor is indestructible, yet impossibly light. My gauntlet extends past my elbow and serves as a shield. Upon the broad cuff of the metal-plated glove is housed a diamond-shaped disc with 3 blades that emerge from its tips with a lethal snap. When flung at my enemies, the disc obeys my will. It lays waste to all of my foes, then faithfully returns to my hand without fail every time. Forged was my sword from the last remnants of creation. Its steel was tempered under the solar storms of a distant star and cooled with the very essence of life. It is the mortal enemy of rot and decay. Never will my sword be broken. Nothing can shatter its blade. It is impervious to impact. Never will its edge become worn and dulled. The jeweled eye that sits within its hilt is my symbol and banner. It is the beacon that shines a light of hope and victory against any abomination that dares to stand against me. In my dreams, I see a day in which black rain falls from the sky. Fibrous strands of greenish-black tar pour from the clouds. Its touch brings death and decay across the land. The arrival of the worm is heralded by a clap of thunder as his fortress bursts through the cloud. It pierces the ground like a dagger stabbed into flesh. It is jagged and pointed. Crystalline citadel with a bulbous blister-like domes upon its walls. The crystalline mountain is the throne from where the worm will conquer and reign. Black waterfalls pour from the dark fortress and crash to the ground, spreading outward from the mountain's base. It is the source of the decay, a black mold of writhing masses of tentacles and tendrils that infest the land with its disease of corrosion. Everything it comes into contact with begins to corrode and rot away, except for one thing: the dead. For what is a warlord without an army of pawns? The dead are absorbed and transformed into vessels for the decay to use and take form. They are the loyal eyes, the foot, and the iron fist of the worm. The once good people are now primal and vicious creatures, robbed of the peace one would find in death. They are servants of the worm. They attack with such rage and violence, even the mightiest of soldiers cower upon their approach. They strike with fingers as sharp as daggers, and stab with limbs as deadly as spears. The worm leaves a wake of desolation and decay in its path. It fills its ranks with the deceased and slain flesh of the villages it encounters. From his fortress, the blisters upon its walls are released, and its army of decayed and mindless drones carry the smelly, rotting masses into the heart of all 6 nations. It will plant itself into the ground and become extensions of the mind and will of the worm. From there it will wage war against every man, woman, and child. It will lay siege against the people with the battle cry of a death rattle, screamed from the lips and mouths of their deceased friends, family, and loved ones. In my dreams, I see the goddess blessing the 6 warriors of each nation before spiriting away the 7th set of weapons. She takes them from the walls of the vulnerable temple and hides them in a place far from the worm's reach. There they will wait for the child foretold to come. In a final act of sacrifice, I see the goddess exhausting the last of her immortality to open a door of light. She places a tiny infant at the entrance, and before closing the door, she says with tears in her eyes, "Goodbye, my dearest little one. Goodbye, my beloved son." It is 20 minutes to midnight, the day of my 15th birthday. I sit on the cold wooden floor, and I am trembling next to a heated stove. But it is not the cold I tremble from. It is a deep fear that fills my heart, the deepest I have ever known. However, make no mistake, I do not fear what is to come. I want that life so much. I am not afraid of my destiny or the future thrust upon me. I do not fear the day when I march against an army of 1,000 rotting corpses. I am not afraid of the many battles I will fight. I do not cower from the thought of many monsters I will face and the many friends I will lose. I am not afraid. Do you want to know what scares me? Do you want me to tell you what fills me with such terror and dread? It is this. I am so afraid that when tomorrow finally comes, it will come and go like any other ordinary day. Kneeling before the knight, Edwin accepted the scroll with great honor. It was such an odd thing he held, one of the likes he had never experienced before. The parchment was cold to the touch and made from leather of the deepest black. It was absent of moisture. Still, it felt slick and slimy in his hand, as if it had been pulled from the river, rotting and decayed. He shivered at the thought of the animal whose hide hailed its origin. The parchment was rolled tight with a clay seal upon its surface. The emblem embedded in the clay consisted of sharp lines and gashes. The boy knew little of matters of magic and wizarding, but he had enough sense to see that dark curses and wicked hexes did this crest bind. "Arise, boy. Make haste, and do not delay your departure. Word will soon reach the enemy of the scroll's discovery. The time of reckoning fast approaches. The sacrifices made to deliver that evil thing into our grasp cannot be wasted with indecision." Sir Leonide, Knight of the Fourth Realm, had said these words. With great effort, the young boy tried to remove any hint of apprehension and fear from his voice. "Yes, my lord," he answered. "Heed my words, and do not deviate from my instructions. Head south, and ride hard across the plains and through the scorched hills until you reach the sunken mountains. Avoid the main paths, and stay hidden until you reach the gates of the White Keep." The knight put a large hand on the boy's shoulder and said with a lowered voice, "The item you carry is dangerous and will betray you if given the opportunity. Do not give it such an opportunity. Never must darkness fall upon it. An hour before nightfall, build yourself a fire, and with green salt must you encircle the scroll to ward off any dark spirits and shadows that call to it. Trust no one. If you must draw your sword, strike to kill. Do you understand me?" The boy swallowed and gave small nods of affirmation to the knight. Satisfied with his response, the knight continued, "I ride east in the morning with every sword and shield that will follow my banner." Sir Leonide paused and looked affectionately down at the boy. "My dear Edwin, I fear this may be the last time we speak, but if fortune favors us, we will attract the attention of the enemy's eyes and draw their numbers toward us. You will pass through the land safely and undetected." The boy took leave of the knight. He swiftly made his way to the supply hut within the encampment to gather all he would need for the journey. He was lost in the thought as he saddled his young steed. Preoccupied was he over the war that tore through the land from an enemy that came from the stars. He wondered about the object openly displayed in the daylight upon his saddlebags. He pondered what would come to pass if the rays of the sun no longer fell upon the scroll. So focused on the dark scroll was he. He took no notice of the hooded figure that approached him from behind.
Such a mighty quest for such a tiny boy. Are the times so dire that it comes to this? Well, one cannot deny that the fates do not have a sense of humor in matters such as these. Wouldn't you agree, little one?
He bellowed a jolly laugh. The boy turned and clenched his jaw at the insult, but held his tongue when he saw the robes of a nobleman. He bowed his head and said with as much respect as he could muster, "I do what is commanded of me, sire." The man laughed again.
Do not take offense, young one. I merely saw an opportunity to jest with you, although it might be wise to avoid such things until a more appropriate time, wouldn't you say?
The man's eyes suddenly narrowed, as if truly seeing the squire for the first time. To the discomfort of the boy, the man approached. He circled Edwin several times, inspecting him up and down. Once satisfied, he knelt before the young man, meeting his gaze as equals, and said,
Yes, I have chosen well. I have chosen well indeed.
At this, he removed his hood and revealed his identity. The squire immediately bowed, recognizing the face of the wizard, and gasped, "The old one." The old man smirked, but still held humor in his eyes.
If I were able to conjure the name of the bastard who thought up that title, I would curse his children and his children's children. The whole lot of them would sprout tails of a pig out of their bottoms.
Jakti, wizard and advisor to the king of the Fourth Realm, returned his attention to the squire and gently lifted the boy back to his feet and spoke.
Nay, brave child, arise. You bow to no one after this day comes to pass.
For a moment, the old man's attention seemed to drift to other matters. He lifted his head as if listening to voices only he could hear. After a time, his eyes cleared and fell upon the boy. He hurriedly began helping to load the squire's equipment and supplies onto the horse, and he said,
Time is precious. So little of it remains, and you have so far to go. Remember, do not despair, my lad. You do not go into the wilderness without defense.
The wizard reached into his robe, removed several objects, and presented them to the boy. He held a torch, a dagger, and a leather pouch. He said, I give to you the eternal torch of El Anandra. Darkness will flee from the light of the flames it shines. Bathe that wretched thing you carry in its glow, and you will be safe. Next, the wizard held up a sheathed dagger of silver and blue steel. He spoke.
This is the blade, Anuela Terra. It fell from the hand of our goddess the day she succumbed to the enemy and was stolen from us. May it give you sight in your darkest hour. Respect this blade, and it will serve and protect you well.
He placed it in the boy's hand. He lifted up the final item and gently laid it in Edwin's hand.
Long ago, a mortal and an angel formed a friendship during the War of Damoni. So deep was their bond that it surpassed death and immortality. At the end of the mortal's life, the angel wept silver light and offered up his wings to exchange places with his dear friend. Moved by this act, the goddess called back his friend from the afterlife and made each into a star. She put them in the night sky, where they would stand next to each other for all of eternity, never to be separated. As they ascended, each shed joyful tears of silver that fell to the ground. My dear boy, I now give to you this pouch. It holds the very last of our most treasured possession. Silver salt from the tears of those two old friends. It is but a pinch, but it is all that remains. And no more will there ever be after this is gone. Evil cannot withstand its touch. Use it wisely, and as a last resort.
The wizard led the horse to the encampment's edge and helped the squire mount his steed. He spoke.
Accompany the scroll and personally place it in the hands of my sister, Aliadria. Tell her you carry the scroll of Necratoratum. She will know what to do.
Trying to fend as much courage as possible, the boy asked the old man, "My lord, why does this scroll carry such importance? Why do you entrust its charge to me? I am a mere squire who has barely seen the edge of battle." The wizard gazed sadly at the child and said,
My boy, I am afraid your questions must be put aside for another day. The less that is known to you, the better. If it were up to me, all of our mightiest men would accompany you, but this quest is for you and you alone. I have foreseen it. As I said, the fates do have a strange sense of humor.
With that, he slapped the rear of the horse and sent the two off racing toward the smoky, black southern horizon. The wizard turned and softly said to himself, "Yes, I have chosen very well." As the squire was an obedient servant as there ever was, Edwin followed his master's instruction to the letter. He rode hard and swift through the scourged hills, and faithful to the knight's word. Not a sign or hint of the opposition's forces did Edwin encounter. Each day, the boy was ever so mindful of the position of the sun. He always gave himself sufficient time needed to prepare the scroll before nightfall came. He carefully sprinkled the emerald salt around the scroll and set ablaze the sacred torch. There he would sit until morning, with his dagger clutched tightly in his hands. It was not until he reached the passageway to the sunken mountains did misfortune eventually find Edwin. A company of troops occupied the mouth of the slender pathway. Never before had he laid eyes upon soldiers of the enemy. Even from a distance, they filled his heart with terror and dread. Long and slender, they stood motionless along the rocky path. Stalks of pointed knobs protruded from their black and brown rotting flesh and grew like that of moss upon the trees of the swamp. No hint of eyes did they possess, except for pin-prick glints of silver like that of a coin. Their mouths slowly opened and closed, reminding him of a fish plucked from the waters, with gills gasping for breath. Consulting his map, the boy confirmed what he already knew. Only one other path could he take. Determined to complete his quest, he continued south and followed the river. When night approached, Edwin repeated his ritual of protective spells and brought his beloved horse into the safety of the torch's comforting glow. Edwin shuddered at the thought of his new destination, the Devil's Maw. It is said, in the age of Goethe, a great hellmouth had formed in those lands. The goddess sprung forth a forest and commanded the trees to bind this new evil. The good trees performed their duty, but eventually came to feel betrayed and abandoned. They turned away from their mandate and betrothed themselves to the Hellmouth. The caverns consumed the trees and merged to become a forest of wood and petrified stone. Now, all men are warned to steer clear of its boundaries, for dark spirits look down upon them with unimaginable hate and ill intent. In 2 days' time, the boy stood before a tree line of bark and gnarled trunks at the mouth of a gaping cave opening. Massive, twisted branches of black and green stretched as far as the eyes could see. Stalactites and stalagmites jetted up and down the stone floors and roof, giving it the appearance of jagged fangs. No sound could be heard. No bird sang or animal stirred within the dark wood and cold stone. The silence and absence of movement were oppressive upon the young boy's spirit. He took what supplies he could carry, unsaddled his beloved horse, and removed its reins. He took a handful of hay from deep within his satchel and held it up to the horse's snout. It caught the scent of the feed and ate gratefully from the boy's hand. Edwin spoke. This hay comes from the stables to the noblemen's steeds of the keep. Follow its scent and continue south along the edge of the forest and caverns until you stand before the walls of the White Keep. My fate lies on a path you cannot follow, my friend. If the grace of the goddess is upon us, we will meet again. Terrible loneliness laid heavy upon the boy's brow as he wished his companion good fortune and set his loyal horse free. With the torch of Elanandara in one hand and a sword in the other, Edwin entered the Devil's Maw, alone, as the wizard foretold. By Edwin's calculation, 3 days' time would it take to transgress the narrowest part of the forest. He would emerge on the morning of the 4th day, with only a quarter of a league to travel. The silence was maddening. The first full day in the belly of the beast. True to its word, the torch of Elanandara burned brilliantly. Never did its wood burn down, nor was its oil consumed by flame. The trees looked down with such hatred and rage. Root and twine writhed on the ground, unable to penetrate the glow of the torch. Thorn and thistle scraped along bark and rock, waiting for a chance to pierce and puncture skin and flesh. On the 2nd day, broken was the silence. Stirred was the stillness. Whispers emerged and called out from the darkness behind the deep groans and moans of tree trunks swaying in the windless night. The vast branches beaconed for a champion to come hence, to handle this transgressor and acquire this hidden thing that tingled the ground it passed over. At last, a guardian emerged from the dark caverns of the hellmouth that lay below. The pleas of the giant trees and stones had been accepted. Upon the evening of the 3rd day, weariness and despair weighed heavy on Edwin. He poured the last of his precious emerald salt around the wicked scroll and sat before it, dagger in hand. Fatigue overcame him swiftly, and the forest saw an opportunity to strike. Masses of twisted and gnarled vines approached from above, carrying a droplet of mildewed water within its crevices. Drip by drip, water fell upon the torch. The flames singed and hissed against the moisture, but slowly its light grew less. With the last droplet of water, Edwin opened his eyes, and the last of the light was extinguished. All was plunged into darkness. In the darkness, the scroll gave a heavy sigh, then silence fell. A scream pierced the night from the cursed object. It shrieked with the voice of 100 women and infants merged into one. It hurt the boy's ears and filled him with terror. The wail slowly faded, and in the distance, something answered the scroll's cries. Edwin unsheathed his dagger, and it cut through the air with a slash. A yellow wave of light shot forth in every direction, illuminating the area. In the distance, he heard branches breaking, rubble fall, and leaves trampled from the one who answered the scroll's call. Not knowing what else to do, he placed the dark scroll into his satchel and buried it under what green salt he could scoop off of the ground. He hung the pouch of silver salt around his neck and nervously gathered his essential belongings. Beyond the amber glow, he heard the sound of ripping and tearing coming from the ground. A large black root had emerged from the wet stone ground. Black thorn covered its body and glistened in the yellow light as it reached for the boy. More thorn roots emerged from the grotesque plant and rattled in the cold air. The boy fell to the ground as similar ripping sounds began to emerge from his left and right. The sound of galloping feet grew closer from the woods. The black root curled itself into the shape of a scorpion's tail, preparing to strike. Edwin pushed himself off the ground, with only a moment to spare as the black root shot toward him. In a burst of speed, the boy ran toward the direction that will lead him out of the forest and caves. He ran without letting up, occasionally slashing at vines or thistles that moved toward him with the bloodlust of an enraged animal. The footsteps of his stalker were relentless in its pursuit. It stomped on the ground and then leapt to the trees and back to the ground. The boy scrambled to the top of a ridge and saw a cluster of vines not yet afflicted with the forest's curse. He grabbed the vines and swung across the open gully to the other side. He quickly cut the vines to prevent anyone from following. He turned to leave when the sound cut through the air. The scraping of two metal blades rung out from the darkness. It kept its distance just beyond the mystical golden light that surrounded the blessed dagger. It continuously scraped its knives together, over and over again. The sounds grew louder and faster. Panic filled the boy. Just as he was about to turn and flee, the scraping stopped, and the beast emerged from behind the flickering shadows of the trees. It stood at the edge of the ridge, and its stare fell upon the boy. It was not a dwarf, not the dwarves recited to children in tales of fantasy and delight. These were ancient, evil creatures who despised the very existence of man. They infested the outskirts of each of the 12 known hellmouths and greedily excavated the caverns for jewels, diamonds, and other precious metals. The creature stood hunched on all fours. It was half the size of a man, naked and emaciated. Its flesh was white and stretched tight over its bone. Every manner of metal rings hung from its flesh, and nails pierced its skin. Filled was its mouth with 2 rows on top and bottom of needle-thin teeth. Upon its head sat the only clothing it wore, a pointed hat, stained brown and red, and made from the skin of human flesh. With a smug confidence, it turned and walked away from the ridge's edge. Turning, it bellowed a loud howl and ran at full speed toward the ravine. The boy turned to flee as the beast jumped high into the air, landing a short distance behind him. Edwin suddenly stopped and swung his weapons in an attempt to surprise his foe. The white creature easily batted away each strike with its 2 short and twisted blades. The boy swung and jabbed, but the pale beast evaded each slash and every attack. It hopped from the ground to the branches of the trees, then back to the ground with speed and grace. Cackling, it was now just playing with the boy. From behind, it jumped onto the boy's back and buried its needled teeth into his shoulder. He howled in pain and stumbled backward until he slammed the creature into the trunk of a tree. Its teeth shattered and broke off in the boy's flesh. The wounded Edwin was losing his duel, and he knew it. He then looked past the dwarf and saw the ground sloped downward and heard the sound of running water. A glimmer of hope crossed his eyes. He broke the bindings of the pouch around his neck and poured its contents into his hand. With all his might, Edwin charged at the dazed creature. He slammed hard into the dwarf, sending the both of them spiraling out of control down the wet hillside and toward the running stream's edge. They rolled and tumbled for what seemed like forever, until crashing hard at the hill's bottom. The beaten and battered Edwin slowly crawled toward the water's edge to make his escape. But the dwarf was unfazed and pounced on the boy. He landed hard on the boy's body, submerging his head underwater. It grabbed a handful of hair and yanked Edwin's head back roughly to expose the child's throat. It laughed in his ear and spoke insults to the boy in its strange tongue. Edwin could feel its hard member dig sharply into the small of his back. He felt the cold steel pressed up against his neck. Blood already beginning to trickle from the cut of the blade's sharp edge. The dwarf lifted its head and howled a cry of victory. Before the breath from dwarf's yell of triumph had entirely left its mouth, Edwin turned his head around and spat a mouthful of water directly into its face. Silver beads of light erupted upon contact with the dwarf's face. It clutched its face. Flesh fell away in mushy clumps and seeped between its bony fingers. Oily black and green blood bubbled over its cupped hands and oozed down its arms. Its eyes were expelled from its skull with such force. The dwarf's head snapped back, breaking its neck. Paralyzed, it wailed in agony from the silver salt eating into its face. Unnoticed, the boy had put the salt into his mouth before his head was plunged underneath the cold water. Triumphantly, the young boy picked himself up and stood over the broken body of the fallen dwarf. In the distance, light from a new dawn broke through the forest's edge, and the boy smiled. Sir Edwin tightly grasped the hilt of the sacred dagger, and with 2 mighty swipes, he took the head and the manhood of the conquered dwarf. On the 4th day, Edwin emerged from the cavern's tree line and fell into the arms of the beautiful sorceress. She had foreseen his arrival and anxiously stood with the boy's faithful steed, awaiting his approach. With his final breath and the last of his strength, he reached into his bag and gave the scroll of Necrotoratum to Aliadria, as the Old One had commanded. Aliadria fell to her knees from grief, for this had not been foretold. The fates had once again made a mockery of the pain and struggles of a mortal to satisfy their need for entertainment. She looked down at the child and mourned the loss of one so young and brave. It surprised her when the boy's loyal steed came forth and nestled its nose against the dead boy's face. Never had she witnessed such bonds of affections from a beast toward a human soul. If she were to render a guess, she would swear it too was grieving the loss of its companion. She could not help but feel pity for the animal. Her thoughts were interrupted when a glint of silver sparkled and caught her eye from within the child's mouth. Hope ignited within Aliadria as a realization ascended upon her. The reunion between 2 friends had created a moment powerful enough to find the tiny granule of silver salt. Aliadria smiled as she saw the depth of friendship these 2 dubious characters shared. The sorceress quickly took out her wand and waved it in circular motions over the boy's body as she said, "Not yet, child. We beg you not to leave us. You have so much left to do in this world. Come back. Come back." Edwin's body began to shudder, and the lids of his eyes fluttered. They snapped open with awareness and life, and Edwin took in a deep breath of air. Tears of joy filled his eyes and flowed down his cheeks in streams. Trails of moisture glistened with magnificent light from the silver salt they held. He clasped the beautiful sorceress by her hands and said, "She is real." She led me through the darkness toward your voice. She spoke of the scroll and revealed its secrets to me. I know how to use it. Be still. Of whom do you speak, child? Asked Aliadria. The goddess, my lady, said the boy. I know where she is imprisoned. I can find her and break the bonds that restrain her. Edwin stood shakily to his feet, his face now ablaze with light from the silver salt of his dried tears. He spoke with such joy. She gave me a message to deliver to the old one. Speak, child. What was the message? Aliadria asked. Edwin looked at the black scroll in Aliadria's hands, and with the light of a seer and the strength of a knight he spoke. She said, "Prepare. The day of the prophecy will soon be upon us. The return of our champion grows near. The time has come to rid the land of the worm." The young maiden knelt amongst the rubble and smoldering wreckage that was once her simple home. Smoke plumed into the sky, and ash hung thick in the air. It stung her eyes, but that was not the cause for the tears streaming down her cheeks. She was in mourning. The day before last, she had departed the group of refugees and returned to her village, determined to find the bodies of her father and 3 brothers. It was her duty to anoint their brows with consecrated oil and bid them farewell into the afterlife. Her father and brothers were among the few who bravely stayed behind to hold off the enemy, providing precious time for her people on the east end of town to escape the massacre that fell upon the village. Her distraught heart was filled with confusion, for upon her arrival, not a single corpse was there to find. The enemy had attacked from the north, under the cover of night. They slaughtered everything in sight. Neither man, woman, or child were spared. Yet no bodies lay before her. No crows feasted on the corpses. The words of the old widow, Mehithlo, came to mind. She was fond of spinning tales about the enemy. Tales, the maiden believed, were meant to frighten young children into obedience once it was time to remain in bed. She surveyed the ruins. It was dark and hazy, with no hint of life. Once a joyful habitat this was, she thought with sorrow. Curiously, she took notice of the grimy layer of soot that covered everything within the burnt-out village. She ran a single finger through the begrimed sludge and saw that it did not give the appearance of ordinary ash, but of mold that grew in the dark and damp places of old. This is not of nature's making, she thought. This is rot and decay I walk upon. The edges of the mold were of the deepest black with hints of green. But on top of its center grew white and gray fuzzy hair that vibrated ever so slightly. If it were not for the irritation from the smoke, she would have sworn the mold and mildew were growing and stretching out before her very eyes. The crackling of burning wood filled the air. Then, without warning, it vanished. All the surrounding flames immediately were extinguished, as if inhaled by an unseen giant. The mold congealed upon itself, forming vines and tendrils. They writhed on the ground before her feet, encapsulating and covering all within its reach. A soft hiss emerged from the ruins. A dense gas swirled and rose into the air from oval and lipped mouths that pimpled the surface of the thicker limbs. It flowed like a liquid upon the soil and clawed up the scorched beams like an animal searching for prey. The maiden brandished her broadsword with speed and skill, for having been the daughter of a great blacksmith and the youngest sibling to 3 boys, she knew the ways of steel better than most. The hiss grew louder as it permeated the terrain. She backed out of the remains of her home, defenses at the ready, and eyes keen to any movement in her field of vision. Cracking and snapping broke the silence as the mist billowed and rolled. It reminded the maiden of the breaking of tree branches after winter ice storms. However, this was different. These cracks and snaps were from something wet and moist. The snaps and splits grew more severe and more frequent with every moment. It arose from all directions. Then all was silent. The maiden gripped the hilt of her sword tightly. She held the mighty blade over her head in a defensive position, ready to take the head of any foe or adversary that would stand against her. She kept this stance in silence and stillness. The girl did not grow weary from the heaviness of the blade, for it was the perfect weight for her. It had been a present from her father, and created just for her and no one else. Broken was the silence from harsh, raspy breaths of lungs filled with fluid and phlegm. The ground heaved upward and separated from wet hands that stretched up to the sky. Unbeknownst to the maiden, the metamorphosis occurring beneath her feet had run its course. The lost villagers had awoken. Worms and maggots still protruded from a type of dead flesh that they could not feast upon. Scabs tore free from wounds that rot healed and spilled pus onto the ground. The poor creatures dragged themselves out from their resurrection holes. Disoriented, they tottered and stumbled, but the scent of the young girl quickly filled their nostrils with desire and rage. Concealed under an entanglement of twisting vines and tendrils that stretched up a wall, a lost villager fell upon the startled girl and bit down on her neck with a ravenous ferocity. To her surprise, its teeth did not tear her skin. The bite hurt terribly, but its teeth felt soft and mushy within its clenched jaw. Several more of the lost villagers slashed at her with thin, pointed fingers, and again they felt flimsy. The answer to this riddle quickly flashed in her mind. Newly risen these foul beasts must be. Their hides had not yet time to harden, she thought. In a high overhead arc, she cleaved the lost villager that stood before her in two with her sword. With the blade's hilt, she struck the one that held her from behind in the throat and smashed its face into a stone wall. Another lunged at her and held her by the throat in an iron grip. She brought up her sword, twisted, and separated its hands from its wrists. In one graceful motion, she twirled and took off the top portion of the creature's skull. An unseen villager, a child, scurried on the ground and locked its arms around her leg. It bit down hard, and she shrieked in pain as she saw blood trickle from the decayed child's mouth. She brought her blade down hard and drove its tip completely through the child's head and buried it deep into the wooden floor. Crinkling and cracking from drying skin and hardening hides filled her ears. She knew time was running out. The girl scanned the area for a means to escape. In the distance, she saw her only hope. An old windmill stood a short distance away. In the absence of any clear path to escape upon, its sturdy walls and a thick door would provide shelter for her immediate safety. She sprinted with all her might toward the haven. She would have made it if it were not for the ground opening up below her feet. She fell hard, sword clanging out of her grip. Wet and cold hands clutched and pulled her deeper into the maw of the dark hole. Further and further she slid. She clawed at the edges of the hole, but the soggy soil fell apart as she gripped for a holding. She turned, and 4 faces stared back at her from the shadow of the muddy pit. For the briefest moments, she saw a familiar shade of green in each of their eyes. A shade of green, much like her own. There was such great sadness in those faces, and a glistening of tears in each one's eyes. As quickly as it had come, blackness and mildewed film consumed all hint of color and humanity. The grasps of those gnarled hands tightened, and the fair maiden screamed in terror. High in the night sky, a strange, high-pitched whirring emerged from the night. The sound was melodic and beautiful. The struggling maiden turned from the dead faces and snapping jaws she held at bay, and saw a twirling diamond of light approach from the corner of her eye. It streaked across the night, ricocheted off a heap of stones, and shot toward the girl in a downward trajectory. It spiraled, missing the girl's neck by a hair, and slashed through each creature without resistance, separating their heads from the shoulder. The maiden followed the mysterious spinning diamond of light with her eyes. It flew into the sky and began to descend toward the ground in a large arc until it came to rest in the hands of a boy. The boy could not have been more than 15 years of age. He stood gallantly wearing thin and light silver armor. The object he held in his gloved hand was a diamond-shaped disc with 3 blades that retracted into itself. He secured the disc to his gauntlet and drew his sword. In that instant, it appeared the mist quivered at the sight of the mighty sword. She watched him run head first into the approaching lost villagers. Her keen eye saw that the boy was well trained, but lacked experience on the battlefield. Still, the lost villagers were no match for his blade and amazing diamond disc. In the distance, she saw another young boy, wearing the garb of a squire, enter the town square. Accompanied was he by 6 fearsome warriors, 4 men and 2 women. They raised their spears and blades high above their heads and charged forward with a loud and magnificent battle cry. From within the mist, hordes of decayed creatures descended upon the small band of knights. Hissing and spitting filled the air. The sharp clang of steel against the hardened exoskeleton echoed across the barren village. The monsters fell upon the warriors from rooftops. They leaped into the air and crawled on the walls. The beasts flanked their victims with lethal precision. The green mist swirled and surged, blinding all caught within its wake. The young warrior approached the maiden. With a smile, he offered her his hand and said,
"Milady, how did one so beautiful as you come to find herself in such a dire predicament?"
She was dumbfounded and in shock at the massacre she just witnessed. She stood aghast at the nonchalant demeanor the boy displayed for the loss of his comrades in arms. She had never seen such disregard for life or such dismissal of loyalty those brave souls must have shown for this child. Puzzled, rage built within her soul, she shouted, "But your friends just perished before our very eyes, and you did nothing. Do you not have any—" His smile grew wider than before, and the boy said,
"My dear, you lay before the warriors of the 6 realms. The other was a squire to my father and champion to my mother. If any one of them were incapable of fending off a pitiful pack of flaccid deadlings, they would have no place at my side.
With a slash, the squire's dagger slashed through the air, releasing a burst of golden light. The malignant mist evaporated into nothingness underneath its rays. In the clearing, the squire stood brandishing a brilliant blade. By his side stood 2 young women of no more than 20 years of age. Each held a short sword in reverse grip and wore gauntlets of silver and blue steel. The 4 men guarded the rear: an elderly man, a slightly aged man, and 2 young twins. At their feet laid the slashed and mangled corpses of the villagers. A second wave of the deadlings came at the warriors like a black wave of water. Their hard skin was glistening in the moonlight. Each of the women warriors took on 2 foes, blocking slashes from lethal fingers with their gauntlets and stabbing decayed flesh with their blades. The old man held a menacing dory spear, capped at the rear with a heavy spike. His hair was long, white, and braided. Interwoven into the braid's hair end was a silver marble. Swings of the spear and snaps of his neck severed heads and crushed skulls. The twins each carried a sword. One brother bore a coppice, a thick, curved saber. The other carried a straight, double-edged sword. They guarded each other's flank and worked as one, anticipating each other's actions. The middle-aged man was blind and held a curved dagger in each hand. He slashed throats and severed limbs with the precision of any sighted soldier. The young maiden recalled stories from the widow and the songs from the minstrels and bards. Could the tales be true, she thought? All the whispers and songs retold and sung. Was there more to those words than she pondered? Could it be true? The prophecy of the day of the worm? The young warrior cleared his throat to return her attention to him. Full of boyish playfulness, and one hand behind his back, he offered his other hand to her once more and said,
"Forgive me, my lady. I'm normally quite shy about things such as this, and find rejection quite devastating. However, in this case I will risk the embarrassment and shame."
With a sly grin upon his face, he revealed his concealed hand, held up her sword and said,
"Would you care to dance with me?"
The maiden saw the dark figures moving in the shadows. She looked into the eyes of this mysterious young warrior and felt a stirring she could not deny. She smiled and took hold of her sword and said, "Good sir, nothing would please me more."